Kia ora, I'm Chelsea Daniels, and this is The Front Page, a daily podcast presented by the New Zealand Herald. European leaders are baffled as Trump digs his heels in over Greenland. The US president has threatened to impose tariffs on 8 allies who remain opposed to his potential takeover of the Danish territory. A 10% levy will kick in on February 1st, possibly rising to 25% on June 1st, affecting Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, Finland, the Netherlands, and the UK. Trump has said the import taxes will remain in place until such time a deal is reached for the complete and total purchase of Greenland by the US. But what does the United States want with Greenland? And how soon will it be until New Zealand is swept up in the chaos? Today on the front page, Waikato University international law professor Gillespie is with us to take us through what could happen next. First off, Trump has floated this idea about Greenland for years now, but now he's actually trying to make it happen. What's changed between now and then?
Let's just take a step back to begin with, because the way Americans understand territory is different to most other nations. And so the ability to buy land from another country is something America did with Mexico, with France, with Spain, and even with Denmark. And so the country you see today is a conglomeration of at least 4 different deals, which made it a much larger area than when it began in 1776. And so what Mr. Trump is now saying is, well, now we can just add to it. And so he's trying to continue a tradition. The problem is that in the 20th century, the practice came up that you needed people to have self-determination, where they would work out whether they wanted to be part of another country or not. And so it wasn't just about the sale, it was about the consent of the people. And so Mr. Trump's dealing with an idea that came from the 18th century and the 21st century. And he's discovering that the people of Denmark and the people of Greenland don't want to sell their territory to him.
Well, he's reportedly refused to rule out using force or some kind of annexation if Denmark and Greenland won't agree to any kind of deal, or sale rather, as well. In legal terms, how serious is that threat, and what international norms would it kind of violate?
The most basic principles that is for each country to determine its own sovereignty and its own decisions about whether they want to join another country or another organization. But we're at a point with Mr. Trump where all of the international rules have been pushed to one side. Whether you're dealing with Venezuela or whether you're dealing with concerns over the larger disputes with China, you're seeing many things, just what we once assumed were normal, no longer standing up to the test of time. International law itself is questionable. And the problem is not one now of law, it's one of politics, because it's bad to bully anyone. It's worse to bully your friends. And right now he's bullying countries which are actually on his side.
And in terms of its allies as well, he has promised a tariff, his favourite word, he loves that word, on at least 8 European countries, starting February 1st, and then upping it again to 25% later this year if they don't comply. They've obviously met and are holding a meeting, all of the European leaders or envoys. What do you think what would they be talking about?
The point of trying to apply economic pressure on another country to make it bend to your will is not something that should be done. You can imagine if China did this because they wanted an island in the Pacific, or Russia did it because it wanted further acquisitions in the Balkans or the Baltic. And you can't behave like this. But the way it responds, the way it happens, is that the Europeans will now go back and say, do we have a counter tariff? Or do we have a collective response against this action which is destabilizing Europe? And because for a long time, most countries have tried to have a policy of silence with Mr. Trump, and the best defense has been to say nothing and just try to minimize the results or minimize the negative impacts. But he keeps upping the ante. And so you start out with a 10% tariff, and now you get another 15% because you speak out against a potential annexation of a friendly country. And so the hard part for countries now is to work out whether they say anything or at what point they have to become a collective and speak together.
What are their options when they do speak together? Because they are standing as one voice. It's not often that Europe speaks with one voice, is it? The likes of Sir Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron and Giorgia Meloni all agreeing over something is quite something to see. What are their options?
This is their options are that they have countermeasures. And so if Mr. Trump puts an additional 15% on European goods going in for countries that support Denmark and Greenland, then the Europeans would then put a countermeasure on the American products coming in. And so we go into a deeper trade war. But it's not all Europe that are currently saying no to Mr. Trump. A lot of other countries are sitting on the side. And then it's not just the European countries, it's also countries like what do you do with Japan, what do you do with Australia, and of course, what do you do with New Zealand. And each country right now is scared of putting their head up in case they get a backhand from Mr. Trump, because just to say we disagree means that you could have an economic consequence that could mean people's jobs and livelihoods are put at risk.
And what kind of position does that put New Zealand in? Because we've always erred on the side of keeping your head down, right?
We're becoming masters right now of keeping our head down. And so you could see a situation like the invasion of Venezuela and the abduction of their president. And so like we make these very bland statements about the support for international law, but we don't say what international law is. We don't say whether the act was legal or it wasn't legal. We don't say whether the Maduro had diplomatic immunity or don't. We just try very hard not to offend Mr. Trump. And so right now, the right thing to do is to say you can't put economic pressure on a country if it doesn't want to sell itself to you. But we won't do that because we're scared of the repercussions if we speak out.
And by the way, I'm a fan of Denmark too, I have to tell you. And you know, they've been very nice to me. I'm a big fan, but you know, the fact that they had a boat land there 500 years ago doesn't mean that they own the land. I'm sure we had lots of boats go there also, but we need that because if you take a look outside of Greenland right now, there are Russian destroyers, there are Chinese destroyers and bigger, there are Russian submarines all over the place. We're not going to have Russia or China occupy Greenland, and that's what they're going to do if we don't. So we're going to be doing something with Greenland, either the nice way or the more difficult way.
And I suppose on one hand, you're kind of waiting until his term ends. But on the other hand, you know that he's trying to get everything done before his term ends and really make a name for himself and mark his place in history, hey?
The good thing is that the New Zealand relationship, like the rest of the world relationship with America, is bigger than Mr. Trump. And so like we've gone through rocky periods before, and hopefully post Mr. Trump, it will come back to a more stable regime or a more stable pattern. But it may not. If Mr. Vance comes in, it's possible that you may see a continuity of exactly the same approach. But the problem now is that you've got America not putting its pressure on countries which we have challenges with, but countries which are friends, countries which are allies. America can get all the defense arrangements it wants with Greenland through NATO, and we can have good relationships with Denmark. It doesn't need to annex the country. And right now, people aren't even sure why they want to annex the country. You go in with one reason, you say it's about defense, it might be about security, it might be about minerals. But there's no good faith in international relations, and it's destabilizing everything.
Well, European politicians have said that Trump's treatment of long-standing allies was just playing into Moscow and Beijing's hands. Do you agree?
You could not have a better playbook for destabilizing the West, because the only chance that the West has of being a cohesive force against either China or against Russia is if it's united. But when the United States is threatening economic sanctions and not even ruling out military, which is just crazy, against people on its own side, you've got to wonder what dream we've woken up in, because it's like the enemy has become not the external but the internal. And this means that Europe in itself could break from NATO. I don't think that will happen, but a lot of countries are now saying, well, who is the bigger threat right now? And can we rely on America, which is now actually economically threatening Europeans for saying they don't want to sell something to the United States?
And what is the point of a international rules-based order if you've got America going into Venezuela and kidnapping its president?
The international rules-based order is upside down right now. The rivets that hold it together are all popping quite quickly, and it's important for countries like New Zealand to work out which way we go. And I would argue that we need to align ourselves more with the European values and Australia in particular as well, and traditional allies, because right now the United States is not representing a country with values that are necessarily the same as what we believe in.
What do you think it'll take for Luxon to step out of course? I mean, especially given it's an election year, I'm not holding it at my breath in terms of, doing anything out of the ordinary when it comes to everything on the world stage.
Any country which speaks out unilaterally without a collective behind it is at high risk. And you can look at what happened to Canada, and you can see what's happening to Europe. And so what Mr. Luxon would require is all of the countries to speak out at the same time. Canada, Australia, Japan, Europe. The friends need to have one cohesive voice, because if they remain fragmented, Mr. Trump will continue to bully his way through them one by one.
Well, the first thing I'd say is that, the decision for Greenland is a decision for Greenlanders. It's a sovereign state, and it's pretty clear that they want to be part of the Kingdom of Denmark. The second thing I'd say is that tariffs is not the way forward in terms of, we don't want to see a downward spiral of tariffs, and for tariffs it's just not acceptable. We want to see it's in New Zealand's interest to see a healthy transatlantic relationship in place. And actually we think through discussion and debate and dialogue, actually, if the US has genuine concerns around Arctic security, we'll have those conversations. But tariffs is not the way forward. So we're pretty clear about that.
If we go back to the beginning a little bit, why does Trump want Greenland?
It's difficult to say. And part of the problem we've got now is that when you've got Mr. Trump doing certain things, he says one thing, but he does something else. So he goes into Venezuela and he's talking about the illegal drugs trade, but it ends up being about the acquisition of oil and the removal of someone he didn't like. I'm not a fan of Maduro, don't get me wrong. And it's right to replace him, but there's ways and means to do it. But the justification and the result are not the same thing. And so when it comes to Greenland, what he wants, it could be he wants access to the Arctic Circle. It could be he wants control of the rare minerals that are there, or it could be for defense purposes and building a security shield. It could be all three. But on the defense point, it's critical to note he already has those rights through NATO and under existing arrangements. You don't need to annex or force the sale of the country to get greater security and defense for the United States, which would make many people suggest it's not about defense. It's actually about something bigger that we can't yet see.
Well, if Trump does need the US to take over Greenland to counter Chinese and Russian intelligence and threat in the Arctic, what is stopping him from then looking at the Cook Islands or similar and then be like, oh, we need to counter Chinese and Russian threats in the Pacific now?
Nothing is stopping him. In fact, it would be easier to take up parts of the Pacific where there's no alliance agreement like NATO and just say, we need this because it's important to our security. But the risk here is not what Mr. Trump sees in the Pacific, it's what other countries see in the Pacific. The risk is that China decides we need to take this country for our defense, or Russia says we need to take this country for our defense. And there's no international mechanism to stop this force. It starts off economic, it ends up being militarily, where one country wrongfully takes another one. And so the risk is huge. But we're already seeing that in this lawless world where countries act to what they think are their self-interests, not with regards to collective norms.
Right. So down here in New Zealand and I guess Australia to an extent as well, we might be looking at what Europe's doing and what's happening over Greenland and think, oh, that doesn't have too much to do with us, literally on the other side of the world. But further down the line, if Greenland Trump is successful in taking Greenland, then Russia and China are probably looking very closely and being like, oh, well, he got away with it. Yeah.
That's right. And many people would argue that you're currently seeing that with Ukraine and also potentially with Taiwan, and that everyone who is not playing by the rules gets something that they want and there's some kind of grand deal. And while the big players win, the smaller countries and the medium-sized countries are at risk if the situation becomes very unstable. In theory, it should work. In reality, it's a dog's breakfast, and it's very dangerous because you're waiting for someone to step on someone else's toe and then full conflict to break out.
If that were to happen, what kind of situation would that put us in? Because it's not as outlandish an idea as perhaps it sounds straight off the bat.
What we need to do is, in an ideal world, if the Europeans put countermeasures, economic countermeasures on Mr. Trump for his threats to annex Greenland, we should join the countermeasures. We should be willing to stand with Europe to say that this is wrong, but we're afraid to do that right now. It's too difficult to think about what would happen if NATO went to war with itself. I do not think that will happen. I think that the relationship is stronger and deeper than what's happening. But Mr. Trump pushes things, and we've all seen it happen in every area. And what you think is settled one day, the next day is upside down. I don't think military force will be used. I think economic pressure could escalate. The economic pressure will have implications for New Zealand. There will be spillover from future and deeper trade conflicts. But New Zealand has to work out whether we remain silent or whether we join the Europeans in saying, you can't do that, Mr. Trump, you're wrong.
And is it likely, given we are entering an election year and the key word on everyone's agenda this year will be the economy, how much faith do you have in the current coalition government that they will stand up?
I don't think, if it's not done collectively, I don't think the current coalition government will stand up. But you have to ask, at what point do you stand up? At what point is there some egregious action when you say enough is enough? And it's in New Zealand's greater interest to say no and object to Mr. Trump than to continue this pattern.
Thanks for joining us, Al.
You're welcome, Chelsea.
That's it for this episode of The Front Page. You can read more about today's stories and extensive news coverage at nzherald.co.nz. The Front Page is hosted and produced by me, Chelsea Daniels. Kane Dickey is our studio operator, Richard Martin, our producer and editor, and our executive producer is Jane Yee. Follow The Front Page on the iHeart app or wherever you get your podcasts, and join us next time for another look beyond the headlines.